Hey, hi, hello, welcome to episode 113 of Trail Society, brought to you by Rabbit. I'm Corinne Malcolm.
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
And how is everyone doing with the weather whiplash season?
Okay. Not quite adjusted to being cold because it hasn't quite it's been kind of cold and then we have like really windy days and then it's like really warm. So I don't know what's going on.
The Boulder wind is real.
Ugh, I know. It's really been pretty fall. Like fall's been hanging on for a long time. It's nice.
Yeah, I had to test a waist light that I'm bringing with me to UTCT, and I was like, I'm not getting up early to do this, but it turns out it's dark at like 5 p.m. So I went for like a 5 p.m. shakeout at the end of my workday on Monday, and it was perfect. I got to test the light. It was great. I was like, oh, this is wild. It is dark now.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday, and I was just like, yeah, it's like it turns dark, and then my brain automatically is like, oh, I can stop studying now. But then you like look, and it's like 4:45, and you're like, oh, well, I guess I can't, but I kind of want to go to bed.
I know. I'm like, oh, it's bedtime, and you're
Yeah,
like, Corinne, it's 7:15.
totally. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have no shame. I'll go to bed at 8 p.m.
Oh yeah.
Just kidding.
I've been
I
going to bed at
can't.
9.
I mean, I think we're not grandmas by any means, but I do think akin to just being busy people with busy lives, it's like you gotta bank sleep where you can because
hmm Totally.
otherwise you're tired all the time.
Yeah, it's like you can't get 6 hours of sleep every single night, so you gotta bank some on certain days, so then it nets out to at least be 7.
Yeah. And then I'm in the boat where I've been sauna training, like just like heat acclimation stuff. Nothing crazy. I'm not like kitted up on a bike doing weird things. I'm just like in the sauna sweating it out. And people are like reading books next to me. They're
Mm,
like, and I am in a
yeah.
puddle. Like I am by like minute 14 or something. I am like there it looks like I've showered. Like water is pouring off of my body. And
Yeah.
they're just like sitting there casually reading a book, and I was like, I can't touch anything because there's water like pooling off my fingertips. Like we live in
Mm,
different worlds, but that also means that I'm like cold all the time now.
totally.
Like I wore gloves on a dog walk last night and it was probably 55.
Oh yeah, I've been wearing my sleeping bag puffy on walks that are in the 50s, and JT's like, it's warm today. I'm like, no, it's not.
You're like,
I'm like, I need my sleeping bag. But yeah, I'm with you there. I got this new bike trainer, and I've been doing like just like a bike or one or two bikes a week, and I don't know how people like don't just completely flood the room they're biking in with sweat. Like I'm like, do I need to put buckets on the sides of my handlebars? Like I don't understand because I put like a towel down, but it soaks all the way through the towel. Like
Yeah, you're like, and
plummet.
I'm not overdressed. You're like, I'm dressed normally and I am
Totally.
sweating this much. Like I don't think you
Yeah.
need to be crazy in this.
It's
That
because
is
we're
funny.
efficient. That's what
Yeah.
we'll say.
We're just so fit. Hillary, is that right? Are we just so fit that we are just sweaty monsters all the time?
I mean, that does happen. It's like the yeah, your body's response. It's like it doesn't know how long you're going to be exercising, so it thinks, okay, we're doing this. We're really adapted to moving, and so it's going to be like we're going to start to cool ourselves sooner rather than later. So that's like an early indicator of quote unquote fitness is like the sooner that you start to sweat.
Yeah.
I
Tell
love it.
that to all the people in core power yoga who stare at you while you're sliding all over your mat.
You're
I'm
like, I've
actually
made
You're just a
super
very,
fit.
yeah, you're like your efficiency to cool itself, let's call it that. It's like a cue that like it's like, well, we might be running for 10 minutes, we might be running for a day. We've got to keep ourselves cool.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, speaking of changing seasons, we have a need for changing gear, and I'm wondering if any of you are running in anything fun right now that might be made by some very good friends of ours.
Well, it's like my more of like my recovery gear. I got
You looking cute?
yeah, like some cool. I actually got. I need to look at the name of it, but I have this really cool like pullover jacket that I use for a warm up. Has a nice little like side vent on the side, and then yeah, just basically like just a really nice like just a jacket that I can throw on after I finished a run, just to kind of keep me warm, so I don't get so cold after like all the sweat
It's
dries.
like your podium kit, basically. I love it. Keely,
Yeah.
what about
Totally.
you?
Yeah, there's this one jacket I've been wearing. It's like a cream white color, so I have to wear it only on dry days when I'm not running trails because I'm like a dirty person and I'll ruin it. But it's really cute. It's called the like women's warm up and go. So it's kind of like a running focused puffy. So it's pretty lightweight, but it is
I have a
warm.
black one, and it's
Okay.
really nice. It's
Yeah,
like the
it's
perfect
so
warm-up
nice.
layer.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So if it's like sub 50, but that's my current threshold for a puffy on a run, I throw that on and then I feel great. But again, it's like so cute. So you can also just wear it, to class or over top your scrubs or whatever. And then it's like double dipping as the best running jacket and a cute accessory jacket.
Yeah, it's the perfect layer for being like, I need to get out for my run and I'm kind of procrastinating. If I start really warm, which I know you're not supposed to do, maybe it's easier to get out the door. And that is the perfect layer for that experience.
Totally. Yeah. And then there's this new long sleeve that's out right now that's like a light pink. And
Mm.
it's very cute. So highly recommend going and checking that one out. And like lucky for you guys, you can get 10% off
Mm.
for this month of November with the code Fall Trail 10, which is Fall Trail 10 for 10% off at runningrabbit.com.
Awesome. We're excited. We got stuff in the works. We got some seasonal things coming down the pipeline for you all. So keep your eyes and ears tuned to what's going to be coming down the way with the folks over at Rabbit. We've got some results to get through today. Not get through. They're very exciting. We've got some results to celebrate today, some quick hits of news, and then an amazing interview with someone who's probably blowing up your Instagram algorithm, if we're being completely honest. Margie Davenport's research out of Canada. If you're interested in like running, pregnancy, postpartum, she's your gal. And we're going to dive into a really, really cool interview with her today. But to get things kicked off, records. Tunnel Hill also blew up my Instagram algorithm because people were so
Mm.
darn excited about, quote unquote, here for the women's race, like the women showing
Seriously.
up there in a massive way. Records falling at the 50-mile distance, the 100K distance, and the 100-mile distance. It was the 50-mile USATF 50-mile championship.
Mm,
I don't know
nice.
if they gave it the road or trail designation because
Probably
technically
road.
I think it counts for trail stuff, but it's a rail trail to towpath. So
Yeah,
it's
I
very,
think it's
very
like
quick.
Tussey. Remember Tussey Mountain Back? It
Yeah,
was also
totally.
like a dirt
Mm.
road. It was also considered the road championship. So
Cool.
probably
Awesome.
also road.
Tussie's a cool race, and I've definitely
Mhm.
sent athletes there who are like
So fun.
50-mile curious, but need like
Mhm.
are more familiar with like dirt road running. It's kind of
Yeah.
like
Oh,
the
it's
the
so good
pipeline
because
to
it's also a
Vermont. Yeah.
relay and so many people are out cheering. So it's like the best way to do your first 50 because you're never solo.
Yeah, and if you're Keely, you can carry like just a plastic water bottle or something during it.
Your first one.
But we digress. I've heard amazing things about Tunnel Hill as well, that people seem to really love this race every year, that the community that comes out for it is also a big deal. But we're going to start with the shortest distance and move our way up in distance. And that's not to say that the shorter distance is less impressive because Ann Flowers' run at the 50-mile distance was, I mean, talk about rising star
Sheesh.
of 2025. ER doc. I think she trains with Hannah Allgood a bunch. I think
Mhm.
they're homies in Colorado Springs. Um, 5:18:57.
So fast.
That's
Yeah.
6:23 minutes per mile. And she
Yeah.
said if she ran slower than 6:30s, it felt bad. So she would just speed back up to 6:30s.
Oh man, that's so insane. Yeah, I saw
I was
the
like, I
time and
hate
I had
that.
a double take. I was like, oh, well, no, it means 518.
Yeah, I was like, that's
So
that's
fast.
real.
Yeah, and she was
It's
on
crazy.
episode 107 if you guys want to hear about her story. She kind of talks us through at least her Leadville training because that was the race she had kind of came onto the map from where she won Leadville this last year.
Yeah, I think she won overall at Javelina 100K last like 2024.
Mm.
Javelina like won the race outright type of thing. Just yeah, stud, but had been very very much under the radar going into Leadville, and I think now it's like, oh, she's on the start line.
Mm.
She should probably be in your top five.
Totally.
Broke Courtney Olson's record from the year before by 13 minutes, which is a huge margin. But also just like a crazy run. Courtney, so at races like this, you can also declare what records you might be going after. So you can say, I'm in the 50-mile race, but I like if things are going well, I'm going to stay in for the 100K, or I'm going for the 100-mile record, but I'm going to attempt the 100K along the way, or whatever it is. Like within the USA track and field paradigm, within the world record paradigm, that stuff is
Mm.
very much like encouraged. And I think it's great. I also can't imagine being Courtney Olson and being like, I'm going to run 1 minute off my world record from last year through 50
Right.
miles, take second in the 50-mile USATF championship, and then stay in for 12 more miles, which is what she does to get the American record at the 100K, which is Ann Trayson's like just over 7 hours from 95 or something. Like
Mhm.
it's a 30 plus year old record. In my head, it was from the record was from 88, but maybe it was from 1995, I think was the most recent thing I saw. But the other cool thing about Courtney's run, to put it into perspective with how fast it was, it's the third ever run by a woman under 7 hours. There are only
Well,
two other sub 7 hour 100Ks. One, I think the fastest time ever clocked is like 6:33 and change, but it was run on a course that's like known for having like an insane tailwind. Like it's set up that way in a
mm,
record, like in a record breaking kind of mindset and like more of a true road attempt. And
Mm.
then there's one other one who I think was set maybe by a Danish woman. And it's like in the 650 something range, but it was not on an IAU compliant course or wasn't IAU verified or something of that nature. So it doesn't count
Mm.
in it, or it's kind of got an asterisk next to it. She still ran that thing, but it's got like a
Mm.
little bit of an asterisk. Like it wasn't eligible, I think, for a record, either
Nice.
a country record or a national record.
Dang.
So Courtney gets the American record at the 100K distance as the third ever woman to go under 7 hours.
So cool. It's so fast too. But yeah, I think it reminds me of when Galen Rupp ran the 10K American record. He had come off running the 5K American record. And I remember hearing a talk at Nike from Alberto, who was basically like, yeah, I told him he needed to run like only a couple seconds slower than his 5K PR to run this 10K. And he just was like, all right, we're gonna try. And I feel
We'll do
like
it.
for her, it's like you were 1 or 2 minutes back of your 50-mile PR
Yeah.
and then had to just keep going for 12 more miles. It's so cool. You have to have such a strong mindset for that.
Yeah. And like the video of her literally sprinting through the finish line is very, very cool. So
Nice.
huge props to Courtney Olson. An Ann Trayson record is an Ann Trayson record, and breaking that is a huge
Hmm.
freaking deal because she is the. Also, just imagine Anne running all this in like probably crappy
Oh,
shoes and
totally.
like maybe fueling and just in a completely
Yeah,
different era
totally.
of
Put her out
running.
there now. We'll
Oh
see
my
what happens.
goodness. Right? Like, yeah, I wish that she was a little bit more, could be more present in the sport. I think she's more or less like a little bit of a recluse at this point in her life and career, which I think is unfortunate because I would love to see her, like I don't know, just like reflecting on the fact that the times that she set were so freaking stout that it's taken huge advancements in sport to get close to them. So
Totally.
yeah, huge props to Anne. And then the last record, and in my head, Katrina Jennings lives in Canada, but I know she's Irish, so of Ireland, sets the women's 100-mile world record, running 12:37:04, eclipsing Camille Herron's run of 12:42:39 that was set at Tunnel Hill in 2017.
Wow.
So, and I think it was Katrina's debut 100-mile.
Yes, that is correct. Which is
Stupid.
crazy.
So in like, I don't know, like not to say frustrating because that's not the right word, but impressive,
So
incredibly
impressive.
impressive. Huge props to the event and the women that showed up and the women that pushed themselves to absolutely insane performances. And any one of those records by themselves would have made it a hugely successful Tunnel Hill weekend, but all three of them in
Hmm.
one race day was icing on the 2025 women's cake.
Yeah, holy cow. Really, really cool.
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna shut my window here so because I'm going blind.
It is a nice day over there for you.
Oh, it's sunny enough that I have to close my shade because so I can use my eyeballs. Okay. Wow, that's so much better. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm not squinting anymore. Okay, so two pieces of news that came across my desk that I just want to touch on briefly. The first one was titled Women's Sports Driving Record NIL or Name, Image, and Likeness Growth as Rev Share Era Begins. And again, this is largely indicative of the high school and collegiate level, but we're seeing it into the professional ranks as well. And it goes on to say women's sports are on track to drive record NIL growth with between 8 and 12% of revenue share dollars heading towards women's sports, according to a new report from Open Doors. From 2022 to 2024, women's athletics grew 4.5 times faster than men's sports, driven by landmark events, including the 2024 Women's Basketball National Championships, which drew 18.9 million viewers, ESPN's most watched basketball game in history. So, again, just highlighting the fact that women are an untapped market potential from the high school to collegiate level and the professional ranks. that was really, really like, I don't know, critical to see. We're celebrating things like that in Seattle right now with there's two new women's professional hockey league teams, one here in Seattle and one in Vancouver. And for the first time ever in league history, the teams aren't going to have to be called just their city name for the first year of play. And so we found out last week that the women's Seattle professional hockey team, it will be called the Torrent, which is really
Nice.
cool. They'll share the same training facilities, building off kind of like the Kraken's setup here in Seattle, which is the men's professional hockey team. So my massage therapist got stolen because she's now the massage therapist for the women's professional hockey team. And I was like, I have to fit on your schedule somehow. So cool things happening in women's sports, but like numbers that are now supporting the claims that we keep making that women's sports are on an upswing. I don't know if anyone has any opinions to the numbers that I just read off.
No
No.
opinions of the numbers. I mean, yeah, I give a I trust them, but yeah, no, it is. I think it is it's always been an like a I feel like a untapped potential. So it's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, there was a similar, I read a thing about trail running this week that was similar in that women make up about 1/3 of the North American ultra finishers every year, and that's grown from like single digits to 20%, and now it's holding steady, and it has held steady for a couple of years now. Despite the number of finishers going up every year,
Hmm.
we're holding steady about 1/3 of the
Nice.
finisher total. With that being like okay, there is definitely a market here, and it's untapped, and there could be a huge win for any brand, any organization, any race
Mhm.
entity to really tap into the women's potential when it comes to trail and ultra running as well, given that those participation numbers are present, are relevant.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you can see that over the course of time with running in general, right? Because it's at first women weren't even allowed to run the marathon, and now it's almost like 50-50 women, men running marathons. So it's like we could probably see that trend continue in ultra running as
And
well.
investing more time into it too. Fast Women reported a record number of women finished under 3 hours at New York
Uh-huh. Yeah.
this past, or I guess 2 weeks ago when this comes out, which is a huge deal. It's not a handful anymore. We're talking like 200 women going
Hmm.
under the 3 hour mark at a single marathon. So the density of women running, striving, like looking to
Hmm.
meet those marks is also on the up and up. So incredibly cool to see.
Yeah. Big
Last one,
fan.
champion them all. The other bit of research that came across my desk this week was Aura is constantly doing little things in the background, and we know
Uh-huh.
that they've been partnering with research institutes to do more research. And the one that came across my desk, it's not necessarily like I don't know. There's a lot of research that I consider like, well, duh,
Yep.
research. It's like, well, duh. Like, but again, it's like supporting, we need research in a lot of ways to support the anecdotal evidence
Hmm.
we see or experience as women, as athletes,
Hmm.
et cetera, and so on. When studies come out and they're like, pregnancy takes a lot of energy, women are like, yeah, I grew
I've been
bones
trying to
inside my
tell you this
body.
my whole life.
Like I gave my bone density to a fetus to become a human. Like,
Yeah.
yes, it takes energy. Um, but a study, Aura published data finally that said, so it says Aura study reveals physiological changes throughout pregnancy. Well, duh. We're going to talk about this more in our interview today. But it
Uh-huh.
goes on to say Aura study tracked over 10,000 pregnancies to understand how physiological markers shift from conception to recovery after birth. Key findings show body temperature rises around week 4 and remains elevated. Yep. Progesterone's a hell of a drug. And participants slept roughly 15 minutes longer per night into the first trimester when y'all are really tired, and before declining through delivery when you're so uncomfortable that sleeping is hard. But it's kind of nice that they are saying like, yeah, like you experience these things.
Hmm.
We have run the numbers, and that's not just a one-off experience. That is a 10,000 pregnancies experience.
Hmm.
So it is again kind of well duh evidence, but it's always important, I think, to have the backing of academia when we're saying like, no, we do experience this thing. Please listen to us.
Well, yeah, and as someone who's dealing with IRB snafus right now with a bunch of studies regarding pregnant people, it's really cool to be able to get 10,000 pregnancies, right? Because first of all, that's not very feasible for most institutions, but like the fact that Aura has been building this back-end model to be able to gather this data and mine it for years, and then also being compliant with these universities to actually do, IRB approved studies is awesome because it's just not feasible for a lot of people to do studies in this caliber.
And I guess just and we touch on this briefly without explaining it in the interview, so we're going to
Mm.
set up some background context right now too. In Canada, they call it ethics, the ethics board. In the US, we call it the IRB approval process. Can both of you actually just maybe speak to like what does that mean as a researcher? Because it is important. Like that is a hurdle, it's a barrier, it's a friction point when it comes to getting studies done. And
Mm.
historically, doing research on pregnant people has been very hard because it's almost impossible
Mm.
or was impossible to get IRB. I'm using air quotes on the on an audio
Mhm.
podcast, IRB approval. So what does that
Yeah.
mean in context all this?
Yeah, so I can do a brief overview and then you can jump in, Hills. But
Yeah.
IRB is like Institutional Review Board. They were built to protect the participants in the study.
Mhm.
So their overall goal is to analyze your research proposal, the methods, the way you're going to handle the data, the way you're going to treat the participants, what your incentives are, if you're bribing them, all of these things to make sure that it's not going to put them at some sort of disadvantage or take advantage of people for your own gain as the researcher. And so it's really just like making sure the research is robust and doesn't take advantage of the participants. And then it's this extra layer for pregnant people because you're dealing with two people. And so they really don't want to, you know, jeopardize the fate of the fetus or the fate of the mom for these studies. And so it's just a lot harder to get studies approved when you're dealing with pregnant people because there's an extra layer to it, which is
Mhm.
good that the IRB is in place.
Right. And like one thing to add too is like traditionally when you're involving like human research studies, like the people who you're getting, if it's like volunteers, right, or recruiters to do these studies, they've been kind of like a second thought. And like, if you're for like the control group versus like a treatment group, like the IRB is actually in place to like ethically then, okay, if we're known that this treatment actually produces like a beneficial effect to these people, then offer that also to the control group after the study is done. So it's just like more ethical treatment for like patients being involved. But again, like Keely said, it's more complicated when there's like two individuals involved.
Yeah. So important. It's going to come up again in this interview.
Hmm.
And I guess to kick things off, let me introduce our guest for today. So our guest today is Dr. Margie Davenport. Dr. Davenport is an exercise physiologist and professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport, and Recreation at the University of Alberta. She holds the Christensen Professorship in Active Healthy Living and is the director of the program for Pregnancy and Postpartum Health. She's a former national team athlete for Canada, and her interest in diabetes actually led her to start studying pregnancy in grad school. And she's been hooked ever since. She hasn't looked back. She's done over 2 decades of research in this space, and we're so grateful that we get to talk to her about it today. Over the past decade, she's worked with a number of national and international organizations, including FIFA, Sport Canada, the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology, the Society of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists of Canada, and the American College of Sports Medicine to support physical activity during and following pregnancy. She's a true leader in the space, and we cannot wait to share this interview with her today. So let's dive right in.
Hi, my name is Margie Davenport. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation. I have worked in the field of exercise, pregnancy, and postpartum for the last about 2 decades. So excited to be here.
Yeah, I did a deep dive. I think we all did a deep dive.
Oh dear.
Keely was pulling articles, and then I was like, wait, have you seen this one? Wait, have you seen this one? So
Oh no.
you're prolific. We're really excited to have you on the podcast today. And it seems like you've been deeply invested in research, particularly around pregnancy and athletics, your entire career dating back to starting your PhD work over 2 decades ago. But before we dive into that research, which we're super excited to talk about today, we love to hear a little bit about how people have gotten to this place in their career, i.e., specifically the why you chose to be on the path you're on.
Yeah. So more than 2 decades ago now, I was a national team athlete. So sport was a huge part of my life growing up. I retired when I was about 25, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So I went back to school in the closest thing that I could get to staying in sport. So Faculty of Kinesiology. I was always interested in research and specifically interested in diabetes because there's a lot of diabetes in my personal family life. And so the only person that was doing research on exercise and diabetes way back when was focused on pregnancy. And so, mid-20s, no real interest in pregnancy. I went and started working with her, and I completely fell in love with the physiology. I fell in love with the stories, well, not all of the stories that I heard working with pregnant and postpartum women. And it's, as somebody who was planning to have a family at some point in my future, I knew that I really wanted to try and understand why there were so many gaps in the research and why we knew so little about such an important time in life that so many of us end up going through. I'm now the mom of two fabulous girls. And so my goal with the research that we're doing now is to really change the conversation and the understanding so that they can go into their potential future pregnancies with the knowledge, awareness, and understanding that most of us haven't had previously.
Yeah, I think we're all very passionate about representation in research, and that's just not just from like the researcher or academia side, it's for the like the cell cultures being gendered, the people that are
Totally.
participating being gendered and what that means. And I think that, before we dive into this research, it's important to set the stage of why this area feels so under researched and has historically been so under researched and is also critically important. And obviously, sometimes this is, IRB or ethics approval for researching pregnant people, societal norms and expectations, the patriarchy, etc. But from your perspective, what have some of those hurdles been? Because obviously, like pregnant people get sick and sick people get pregnant, and therefore it seems logical to want to know and understand what's happening here.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I think it's a really complicated history. Just from a cultural perspective, we have had this view that pregnant women are fragile. I would argue we are probably the least fragile points in our lives. But there's been an idea that women in general are quite fragile creatures, and so that they need to be sort of held with or taken with caution overall. When we talk about exercise, I think that we have a fairly good understanding that exercise across the lifespan is quite healthful and beneficial. But this really unique period of pregnancy, we have the opposite standpoint that we have to be quite cautious, and we actually have to prove safety before we can give these broad recommendations. Because we've had this long held cultural belief that we do have to be extra cautious in pregnancy, it's been extremely difficult to, sort of push the boundaries of what we actually know when we're putting in ethics applications to be able to do studies on high intensity exercise, longer duration exercise, or heavy weightlifting during pregnancy. We actually have to start at a very base level. So typically I'll start with doing just a survey, across the world, typically asking people who did continue running during pregnancy or did continue to lift heavy during pregnancy about what their experiences were and what their health outcomes were at the same time. Based on that information, if we see that there is sort of a signal of safety, or in the case of heavy weightlifting, where we did a study of 600 and something people who lifted more than 80% of their 1 RM before pregnancy, they continued during pregnancy. They had a 51% reduction in the odds of pregnancy complications. That's a really important finding, which actually led to allowing our ethics boards to be comfortable with me doing in-person assessments of fetal health when they were doing the heavy weightlifting. We're doing the absolute same thing with running. So we've been doing surveys. There's been sort of this lower quality evidence building over the last little bit. So now we can do the in-person assessments to directly measure safety at the longer durations and higher intensity exercise now.
I got in trouble during grad school for telling my advisor that I thought that oftentimes sport was ahead of science and that we do science then to like back up what we're seeing in sport. And I think that's like another perfect example of that, of being like, okay, well, like we know that this is happening out in the real world. How do we utilize that information to allow us to do the research we want to do? You also, I think, work in a really interesting realm outside of specific research, and that's being a consultant to organizations like FIFA, for example.
Hmm.
And I work with the PTRA on the trail running side, the Professional Trail Running Association, and we've been working with the people in the higher ups of our sport to better protect women's like elite status coming back from pregnancy, for example. And
Amazing.
I think that like that work, can you just share a little bit about being an advisor in that capacity as well? Because while that's not like direct research, sometimes I know that there is research components to it. Like what does that bring to your like I
Hmm.
guess span of practice?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, sporting organizations are, and, female athletes are way ahead of the research, unfortunately. But I think that organizations like FIFA, the IOC, and others are really recognizing that there are lots of athletes who want to extend their careers beyond, when I retired at 25, I felt old. I felt I had to retire because I had nothing left to give anymore. And now, 25 as an athlete is like nothing. Lots of athletes are training into their 30s and 40s, and that overlaps. Your time of peak performance with your time of sort of optimal fertility. And so now that athletes' careers are extending, many of these sport organizations are showing or recognizing that they do have to put these, policies in place to be able to support the athletes. So as a consultant, it's been super, super exciting. Lots of fun because you can see the direct changes that are happening that are going to actionably support athletes' lives, give them reproductive choices, whether they, have the ranking frozen to be able to do egg freezing mid-career, or if they're going to start a family mid-career. The options that are available to athletes now are completely different than 20 years ago when I was an athlete. So it's been a lot of fun to not just do the research, which many of these organizations are actually quite supportive of, but to actually help to develop the policy and action it in a much faster way than we often see in academics. So that's great to hear the work you're doing. It's super, super important.
Yeah. Oh, we're trying. It's a little bit clawing forward, but it's using examples like the UCI, like FIFA, like the International
Yeah.
Triathlon Union. Like we're using
Yeah,
those sporting examples as an example for trail and ultra running. And then I think, again, it's the kind of like you have to see it to be it thing. And while those direct actions better the elite side of sport, the professional side of sport, I think that it can trickle down to women's participation broadly.
totally. Yeah,
Hmm.
and so a lot of the work that we're doing with FIFA, we have a couple of really big papers that are coming out that are moving beyond just the pro athletes and actually focusing on grassroots and supporting amateur athletes as well. Because you're absolutely right. As soon as you have some of the pros, getting pregnant, having a family mid-career, the trickle down effect of being able to see what you can actually do is really powerful.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Keely, why don't we dive into we want to talk we want to set the stage, I think, a little bit for like what happens to the female body during pregnancy and then kind of like implications of exercise during it. So Keely, why don't we dig into that section?
Yeah, what you just said, Margie, really resonated because here in Portland, I'm a student at OHSU, and we're doing a couple of studies looking into like pregnant people and fertility. And some people will be like, "Oh, why are you studying this? Like the contracts are already covering this stuff for these athletes, and this, and this. Like, do we really need to study it? Like, they're gonna get support in this area." And my follow-up is always, "Well, we got these contracts, which is amazing. These contracts are going to support, IVF if needed. They're going to support egg freezing if needed. They're going to support X, Y, and Z. But we actually, to your point, haven't done any of the actual grunt work research to say, does training impact these things? Am I
Yes.
going to be able to utilize this contract to the best of its ability, or am I actually like unable to actually reap the benefits of some of these things, right? And so
Yeah.
that resonates a lot. But I think one of the problems with these entities, and again, this is amazing what we're going through right now, right? Like we're allowed to nitpick it because we're given these opportunities, and I'm so glad that we're having these things put in the contracts. But I think some of the problems still lie with the people who are writing these contracts might not actually even understand what goes on during pregnancy to the body.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so why don't you kind of give us a little bit of background on that? I know in a paper from 2021, one of the opening lines was absolutely incredible. It describes pregnancy as pregnancy is life's cardiovascular stress test. Can you lay out just some of the profound physiological changes pregnant people's bodies go through during pregnancy that are like a little less obvious to the general population?
Oh, absolutely. So, like I said, I fell in love with the physiology. I'm an exercise physiologist, so this is my jam. I love it. So pregnancy is going to affect virtually every organ system within the body. But a lot of what I focus on is really on the cardiovascular system, which is probably where the most profound effects are happening. But I think that's also where some of the potential improvements that we see with athletes or pregnancy advantages that we often see, especially with our endurance athletes, are coming from. So over the 9 short months of pregnancy, blood volume is actually increasing by about 50%. Now, if that were to happen to anybody else but a pregnant woman, we would have sky high blood pressure and it would not go well. But to go along with it, we actually have changes to our blood vessels where they relax and they dilate to help accommodate for this increase in blood volume. Along the same time, we have an increase in our heart rate, about 15 beats per minute higher from preconception to term pregnancy. We also see the heart gets bigger, the heart gets stronger. It's pumping about 30% more blood every minute as well. But the really cool thing is that it's kind of like a training effect that we're having with this increase in blood volume overall and the increase in strength of the heart. After delivery, most of the physiological changes, like your breathing rate, the size of your uterus, obviously the belly's going to shrink as well. A lot of that changes and reverses very quickly after delivery, but some of the cardiovascular changes, such as the size and strength of your heart, is actually going to persist for quite a long time. And we have data, good longitudinal data, which demonstrates that even as far out as a year postpartum, that your heart adaptations are still actually persisting. So when you layer on exercise at the same time, we don't have as much information, but we would anticipate that the additional sort of, I'm going to call it a stress, but it's a good stress. The additional changes that are happening when you exercise during pregnancy are only going to enhance these overall adaptations. And what we're seeing overall when women are exercising during pregnancy, that we do see these improvements in their cardiovascular health. So we have about a 40% reduction in the risk of having high blood pressure during pregnancy, a 40% reduction in the risk of having diabetes during pregnancy. So the adaptations of both the exercise and the pregnancy itself are really profound and super cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it was, I pulled it from one of the papers that Hypertension Canada listed prenatal exercise as a primary intervention for preeclampsia risk reduction, which kind of
Yeah.
speaks to that blood pressure
Yeah.
component. Are there other distinctive benefits for maintaining like moderate intensity and volume during pregnancy?
hmm So, I mean, we talk a lot about the physiological changes that happen with exercise and pregnancy and the risk reduction. But what we don't talk about enough are the mental health benefits. So what we do know is that when you exercise during pregnancy, that there's about a 67% reduction in the odds of having depression. I think this is particularly important when we talk about athletes. So when we have an athlete, at least for many of us, we identify very strongly with our sport. We identify very strongly with exercise and the, physiological, but also the mental health and stress benefits that we get from exercising. A lot of organizations would traditionally take athletes right out of their sport. They may be told you can do yoga, or you might be able to go for a gentle jog or a run, maybe lift some light weights. But what we were finding is that many athletes were taken away from their team if they're in a team sport, or removed from their trainers. And this can have some pretty profound adverse effects on mental health, social well-being overall, which can influence your physiological health as well.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. There's a research paper that you were part of that like expressed this in a really beautiful way, and there was this really great graphic in it, and it talks about, I'm like a sucker for like descriptive graphics. And it talks about the biological um kind of component of that, but also the like psychosocial component of that being
Yeah.
obviously like self-esteem, body image, self-efficacy, like I can do hard things, I can move my body, but also like the biological side being like it lowers cortisol, like those direct implications of the mental health, anxiety,
Mhm.
stress component I thought were incredibly interesting. Are there other kind of specific things that you've seen in research, either biological or psychosocial that have had a impact on like a positive impact on women's mental health during and postpartum, during pregnancy and postpartum?
Just in terms of the exercise itself.
Yeah, exercise being kind of that like a potential buoy for that system.
Yeah, I mean, we see it very consistently. So, we've done interviews with elite athletes, and they do tell us that they want the guidance and the ability to continue to train during their pregnancy. In the general population, we see that even, if they weren't active before, that if they are starting exercise during pregnancy, that it can really help to support their mental health. We see very similar things postpartum as well. Postpartum, especially those first 12 weeks, are a period of vulnerability. A lot of people lose a lot of social support, engagement in, seeing their colleagues at work or at sport, and many feel quite left alone. So we do see, again, being physically active postpartum can help to reduce the risk of postpartum depression by about 45% as well.
Keely, before we dig into the study that I think has the title that as soon as I saw it, I sent you the like link and I was like, get me the full article. I want to set the stage, right? Because we're talking a lot about exercising, like exercise is good during pregnancy. If it decreases by, like, we've got some specific data that we'll go into, but what is the general consensus right now for like what is a normal or ideal volume and intensity distribution for exercise during pregnancy? Because I feel like that has shifted a lot over like the last 2 decades. And it's one thing we're sitting here as athletes who like run a lot and exercise a lot. And then there's like a normal population of people who
Mhm.
exercise less than we do. What is that consensus on volume that's healthy, maintaining volume during pregnancy, et cetera?
hmm So for the general population, we have pretty good global consensus that 150 minutes of moderate, or depending where you are, moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity is encouraged. And again, that's to derive these key health benefits for both physiological, but also mental health. Importantly, at that level of activity, we don't see an increased risk of having a small baby, an early baby, or a miscarriage. So all really important outcomes. The funny thing about the 150 minutes, it wasn't actually pulled just from a hat. So that's the exact same number that we hear for the general adult population. But with the 2019 Canadian guideline that I led, we did 12 systematic reviews and meta-analyses to support that particular guideline. What we did before we even started the process is we identified that we wanted to see or identify the threshold where we would have at least a 25% reduction in the odds of any of the variables that we saw a dose response relationship, meaning that as the increase in your intensity or volume of activity goes up, are we going to see a concurrent increase in or reduction in the risk of having this particular complication? So we saw that overall for 5 different outcomes. And at the end of the day, we're seeing a 25% reduction in the risk of having preeclampsia with 80 minutes per week. But to get those mental health benefits, we saw 150 minutes. So we encompassed all of those 5 outcomes that had a dose response, and that's where we ended up with 150 minutes. But
Mm.
again, that dose response idea is actually really important because as we see an increase in the volume of activity, we do see a further increase in or decrease in the risk of having these complications. The problem that we ran into 6 years ago is that we had really limited information about longer duration exercise, higher intensity exercise. Almost all available literature at that particular time was based on walking. And so walking is this phenomenal activity, and it can be really beneficial for the vast majority of the population. But when we talk about athletes, as a former athlete myself, you tell me that I'm going to go from, running an hour at a time to, basically doing 2.5 hours a week. That's not going to cut it. But we just didn't have the evidence at that particular point in time to be able to expand beyond that. And that's where the research has changed so much over the last 6 years, that we now have some of the first evidence available in ultramarathoners, in people who are lifting heavy during pregnancy. All these things we thought we couldn't do back even 6 years ago, we're now showing that it's actually quite healthful from both the physiological standpoint, but also from a psychological standpoint as well.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I think that to your point, now we have some data on that. We know a lot of people train a lot more than 150 minutes per week.
Yes.
Your one of your more latest studies was a survey study that was published this past summer called Miles and Maternity, a survey of long duration exercise during pregnancy, where you got over 300 athletes to kind of partake in this survey. And you kind of concluded towards the end that greater than 300 minutes, which is, double than what we were just saying, seems to be pretty okay for people during pregnancy. Again, probably with a lot of caveats being that like you're not just going 0 to 300 minutes per week, all of these things.
Exactly.
But kind of for the three of us as ultra endurance athletes, this really piqued our interest because for me it triggered two reactions. One being super positive, like this is amazing, this kind of data is awesome because I think a lot of people who do exercise more need to know that it's okay to continue this. And then the
Hmm.
other reaction was kind of like alarm bells going off because I know that a lot of people, especially in our sport, might take that to the extreme, right? And be like, oh, well, I'm allowed to do whatever I want during pregnancy. So, like, I'll just keep doing this craziness. And so, like, talking through that, we had a recent interview with Dr. Colangelo or Jill Colangelo, and we talked about how, a lot of people think that exercise is good. So that means more
Mm.
exercise is better. And so do you think that there's like maybe a limit where this would be disadvantageous for athletes to continue to push through? Any information there?
Yeah, great question. So, one key point when we talk about, at least with the 2019 guidelines in Canada and most guidelines around the world, we do suggest that if you are going to substantially exceed current recommendations, you do need to do that in consultation with your healthcare provider to ensure that you're, getting appropriate fetal growth and development, that, you're recovering well, and that, weight gain is sort of a key sign that we look for to make sure that, the pregnancy is proceeding generally quite well.
Mhm.
That being said, if there, the question that I have, the burning question for me is whether or not there is an upper limit or a maximal amount of activity that somebody can do while they're pregnant. We don't have that information yet. Every time that we set sort of a limit of what we think is kind of the upper end of what can be done, some athlete's going to just blow that out of the water. Case in point, we published a case study on an ultramarathoner who provided her Garmin data on her last two pregnancies. One, she was running substantial distances while she was a twin pregnancy, which is a relative contraindication to exercise pretty much around the world. And then the second one, she ran 13,000 kilometers, probably like 9,000 miles. Sorry, my math is terrible, across her pregnancy. And what we're seeing is that, there were a few complications, but they were not related to the exercise. That overall, she had a very healthy pregnancy. Anecdotally, she told us she did it for stress relief because she really identified and she enjoyed it. And so there could very well be an upper limit. But as researchers, that is our job to do the research to see what or if that limit actually is. So far, I really haven't seen one.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's this kind of, I don't know, maybe misconception. And again, I think it goes back to like, oh, women are fragile and pregnant women must be extra fragile, that, strenuous or long duration physical activity would like redirect blood flow from
Hmm.
the uterus, from the placenta to
Hmm.
support the mother's exercise. It seems like there isn't a real fear that we've been able to elucidate at this point that is like that we're compromising nutrient or oxygen delivery to a baby during that time period. Like that seems like a complicated math equation,
Yeah.
but again, maybe this goes back to the cardiovascular system, blood plasma
Hmm.
volume, et cetera, et cetera. Like, is that kind of where that fear can be quelled for people? Or as our friend Rachel Drake likes to say, you can't shake it out, which I think is some of the best like running while pregnant advice we've been given.
That's a good one. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's kind of twofold. One, the research that we have so far, and we have so much more that we need to do. Most of the work that I'm doing right now is actually, I call it our grant that supports it through the WUSI Foundation, is actually called Extremes of Exercise in Pregnancy, because we do want to start to test those more extremes. That being said, I've traveled to Nepal. I've gone to the Everest region and done exercise testing in high altitude natives of Sherpa descent, and put them through exercise testing to see what the fetal responses are. Again, they're extremely well adapted to high altitude. Their oxygen saturation is sitting at 85%, which if we saw that here in Canada, they'd be straight to the hospital. But I think that the physiology of somebody who is pregnant, wherever you are around the world, that there are some adaptations that are in place that can help support a healthy pregnancy where you are exercising at those higher levels. But you have to have the appropriate cautions in place until we have the research to support what can be done. So again, close consultation with your healthcare provider, always monitoring for fetal movement. If you don't have fetal movement after your training, you need to, well, first you drink a really cold glass of water. And if that doesn't wake baby up right away, you go straight to the hospital. Same sort of thing. You have to appropriately fuel. Some of the issues that we do see with athletes, especially, is that they're not fueling enough for their pregnancy, but also their training as well. That applies to just generally athletes as a general rule, but it's especially important during pregnancy. Hydration is key, and taking appropriate cautions. We don't have enough data right now to advocate going for a run in 40-degree heat and 45% humidity. Like there's certain precautions that we do have, but I think the evidence that we have should start to relieve some of the uncertainty and fear that we have. Because at the same time, when we're telling athletes to reduce their activity levels in the absence of medical reason why they should be, so we call them contraindications, what we're actually seeing is that these athletes are having higher risk for complications during their pregnancy. But we also see that when they return in the postpartum period, they're actually at higher risk for injury as well. And so we do have to take a bit more of a wholesome approach to our recommendations about exercise in pregnancy and also in the postpartum period.
Yeah, I think there's
Long-winded answer for you.
no, it's great. I think there's a stat that I pulled for kind of the postpartum discussion that basically comes down to a 50% reduction in exercise time during pregnancy correlated, like per week, effectively, correlated to an 89% increase in risk of injury postpartum. So talking like that's kind
Mhm.
of, I think, not elevating, like shining a light on that specific element
Yeah.
of it. I think the other concern for folks is, it's obviously like fetal health outcomes, mental health
Mhm.
outcomes are big, but what about like pelvic health outcomes? I think that's the other pushback we get from many
Mhm.
of the armchair quarterbacks that we can talk more about. But I do think it's this idea of like, well, isn't that bad for like your pelvic floor, for your pelvic floor health? Like, what is that? How is that element something that we can, look at or research in pregnant runners and people returning postpartum?
Yeah, absolutely. So, leaking while you run is obviously uncomfortable. It's embarrassing, and it is something that we don't love. However, I think it's also a key component of any athletic pregnancy is getting to know a really great pelvic floor physiotherapist before you're even thinking about becoming pregnant. So I think this is across the board with all runners because there's such a high prevalence of urinary incontinence with running and impact sports in and of itself that seeing a pelvic floor physiotherapist before you get pregnant, super important. As soon as you're pregnant, you do want to be assessed if possible and do that pelvic floor muscle training. But one of the key issues that we often run into is that there is this sort of historical or long-standing belief that if you leak at all, you should stop and reduce because it'll make the symptoms worse. However, the data that we have does not support that belief. In fact, continuing to exercise while you're pregnant and in the postpartum period is actually beneficial for pelvic floor health overall, pelvic floor muscle training, so strengthening, but also learning how to appropriately relax those pelvic floor muscles is also really, really key. And so we do see that there's a substantial reduction in urinary incontinence if you continue to engage in exercise. Now, with the postpartum period, sorry, I know we're mostly on pregnancy, but this is a really great point for postpartum, is that when we put together the 2025 Canadian guideline, one of the things we wanted to talk about is contraindications to exercise postpartum. So medical reasons why you shouldn't exercise postpartum or you need to modify. Now, as a panel or sort of international committee or community, we didn't have good consensus. So I brought all of the sort of major experts around the world who had led other guidelines internationally. Many of them were actually pelvic floor physiotherapists. And so we did this Delphi study where we identified what would be a contraindication to exercise postpartum. One of the key points we wanted to make is that urinary incontinence, pelvic floor dysfunction is not a reason to avoid exercise postpartum. It is absolutely a barrier, but the data that we have shows that exercise does help support pelvic floor health, and that as a barrier, you still want to get treated, you still want to get assessed, but we don't stop exercise specifically because you're leaking.
I think we'll like spend a little bit of time diving into some of that specifically and like moving into this postpartum period, I think is a great place to pivot. I do think that there are a lot of opinions out there about
Mm,
how, when, why athletes should return to exercise postpartum. I think that part of the judgment might come from we just don't know a lot. And I mean,
mm,
it's also hyper individual. I'm going to continue a theme of
absolutely.
reading your research back to you. Um, and there was a 2022 study where they reported that only 31% of pregnant or postpartum runners received advice on returning to running after childbirth. And the consensus statement that this was reported in, that we've actually touched on briefly on this podcast before, goes on to say, as a result, runners often self-determine how to continue running during and after pregnancy, and approximately 46% of runners stop running during pregnancy, and 25% do not return to running after childbirth. I
Yeah.
was saddened, obviously, by those numbers, and I'm wondering when you all were putting together this research and this consensus statement, did those numbers shock you?
Um, yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, there's this great stat where, what we found was that two-thirds of mothers actually cite motherhood in and of itself as the reason why they stop being physically active. And the unfortunate part is that if you stop being physically active during this critical period of time, we often see that people just don't return at any point in their life. And that has adverse consequences for future health, very much so. Unfortunately, those data don't really surprise me. I think actually, if anything, they're lower than what I would have expected to see.
Yeah, I think it is kind of that like I find a lot of research is like, well, duh, research where I'm like, yeah, we knew
Mhm.
this. Like this
Mhm.
is I'm glad that we're confirming it now. And I do think it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, the a 25% not returning to run based on what you just said is actually like that's not
Mhm.
terrible. Like 75% are, that's great. But,
Mhm.
reflecting on that, I think is also a difficult thing for people to be like, oh yeah, there's societal norms, there are physical norms, there are
Mhm.
other things that are hampering women's return to run. I think
Yep.
we're gonna dig a little bit back into kind of the pelvic floor injury concerns and soft tissue concerns and the energy demands specifically that come
Mm.
with them. We know that training volume and intensity, I think a big concern actually for a lot of our friends, we've got a lot of friends who have little ones right now that are running, is that intensity or volume might negatively impact a parent's ability to breastfeed. And I'm wondering, like, how real are those concerns? And and there's another breastfeeding question that we definitely have related to injury as well. But I'm wondering, like, when it comes to hurdles of women and of runners returning postpartum, what are some of those hurdles? What are some of those reasons why people just don't return to activity once becoming a parent?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different reasons. Having a child, especially a young child, it can be exceptionally difficult. My kids, they didn't sleep for probably 5 years. They were very active. I didn't have support at home because my family was a couple provinces away. The barriers that people face postpartum are very multifactorial. You just might not feel like you have the energy or the motivation to get up and exercise. But it's very individualized individualized to your own situation, which is why, if you're thinking about returning to activity, you do have to think about the barriers because it's not the same for absolutely everybody. Um, I
And I get
actually forgot what your question
no, no,
was.
no, no. I think this is a great place for us to bring back in this idea of like people
Hmm.
aren't getting advice on returning
Yeah.
to run, and a lot of active people are having to self-determine what that looks like for them because there
Hmm.
isn't good advice out there. As you have been digging in more and more to this research space, as you've had your own experience having two kids, what are, if there are any, best recommendations for individuals who are hoping to return to activity postpartum? Is there a recommended timeline? Is there a recommended, build back that people can be, holding on to when they enter that period?
Hmm. Yeah, so the research has actually changed a lot in the last even 6 years, especially. Before that, we pretty much thought that, postpartum was going from being pregnant to not pregnant. And within that first 6 weeks, we have most people, go see their healthcare provider at 6 weeks postpartum. They get medical clearance at that point in time, and they are literally able to go and run a 10K the next day if they so desire. But when we think about, or we've sort of changed the way that we conceptualize the transition from pregnancy into postpartum, a little bit less of a, sharp change from pregnant to not pregnant to you actually need to rehabilitate depending on what your experiences were. If you reduce your activity levels very early on in pregnancy or very late, there's labor and delivery that can have some pretty significant impacts on your ability to return postpartum. But recognizing now that there is no very specific timeline to return, some people are ready very early postpartum. Some people are ready much, much later postpartum. And so having these specific timelines, while they're a great idea in theory, when we test them to the research, they actually don't hold up because everybody's experience is so individualized. And so that's why with our 2025 guideline, we really strongly emphasize the importance of an individualized return to activity that is going to be certainly gradual because you have to build those foundations. Doesn't really matter how long you're off, that there's going to be some level of rebuilding foundation and that you have to gradually progress back to or up to where you want to be. That has to be symptom based overall. And it's recognizing that everybody's journey is so individualized. And, you might go through a period where your baby is sleeping really well, and then suddenly they decide not to randomly at the drop of a hat, and that might impact your ability to continue returning. You might have to pause, you might have to regress a little bit, but it's like reflecting that there is no one size fits all return to activity.
Yeah, just like there's no one size fits all for like how breastfeeding goes for moms during the postpartum period and all of these
Hmm.
things.
Yeah.
Just back in August, a retrospective paper came out surveying like almost 600 individuals to look at the potential relationship between physical activity, breastfeeding, and musculoskeletal injury.
Hmm.
Obviously, we know that bone density can be impacted by breastfeeding and pregnancy. But in this paper, you were kind of just looking to see what were these factors that were at play during this time. And so you found that 22% of them experienced an injury in this first year after giving birth. And obviously, many things are multifactorial. It seemed that this paper came to the conclusion that breastfeeding alone might not be the primary culprit here,
Hmm.
because when you dug more into the details, it looked like almost a 300% increase in risk of this injury postpartum with a prior or current eating disorder. That
Hmm.
kind of makes sense. We actually just discussed this the other day with someone who had an eating disorder prior to pregnancy, that their bone mineral density just did not come back up after lactation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, you guys also found that maintaining preconception physical activity during pregnancy might reduce the risk of the postpartum injury. Again, kind of to your previous point, you're not going from zero to hero, you're kind of just maintaining that training volume.
Hmm.
And so, is there something specific that runners at any level or elite runners should be specifically aware of during this time period, given kind of the findings of this initial study you guys did?
Hmm. So I think my biggest takeaway is that we are under recognizing the critical importance of fueling before, during, and following pregnancy. You're absolutely right. So data suggests that from preconception to postpartum, that there's about a 6% reduction in overall bone mineral density. It remains depressed during lactation. And in theory, it's going to rebound after menses restarts and you've stopped lactating. That being said, if we think about our history of exercise in pregnancy, where this idea that you need to rest, relax, take it easy, it is possible that some of the changes that we're seeing in bone mineral density is a little bit induced by the reduction in activity. So any sort of loading activities, whether it is running or lifting heavy weights, is actually going to help to strengthen your bones overall. If we take those activities away, then you may actually be reducing your bone density. And there is one single study which actually supports this theory that was published quite a few years ago. So we're actually following up quite a lot of work right now, looking at bone health in pregnancy and postpartum to see if we can actually help prevent it. But a key part is certainly the exercise, but you have to focus on the fueling as well. And so that kind of plays into this idea as well about a history of eating disorders. So when you have a really severe eating disorder, you can have nutritional deficiencies, which can obviously impact bone health, but also connective tissue health as well. If it hasn't reversed in a way that your bone mineral density is back up and you're actually entering pregnancy with lower bone mineral density, you could actually be at much higher risk for these bony injuries. When we broke it down just across all of our data, we actually didn't see any difference in the risk between those who breastfed and those who did not. And so these data are supporting that just in general, breastfeeding in and of itself may not cause an increased risk of injury. But again, what we don't understand enough about is the interplay between the exercise, lactation, and fueling.
Yeah, and it's almost like we should create some sort of survey or screening tool that we can administer to athletes, right? Like, or even just every pregnant person to kind of decide, like, is this person at risk for low bone density going into pregnancy? Because that person's going to have a higher risk of injury
Mhm.
postpartum. And then if so, like, do we get a DEXA scan? Do we get them on some sort of anti-bone resorption? Like, yeah,
Mhm.
it's very interesting. We just had this discussion in one of my journal clubs the other
Oh,
day.
cool. Yeah, and
Kaylee's
I
like,
mean, I
I'm
think
deep in it.
the awareness is so, so important,
hmm
right? You said earlier a lot of research is well, duh, and you're absolutely right. A lot of it is confirming what many of us already know, but there's also a huge number of people that don't know this. And I think when I think back to my own pregnancies, I had no idea that my bone mineral density was going to change. And I wish I had,
hmm
especially now as I'm into the older years where my bone mineral density is already on its downhill decline. So.
Yeah, that energy component is really important. I love when research somehow finds its way into mainstream stuff, even if it's like years after the fact. And I subscribe to all these different newsletters, and a bunch of them are like the sports wire type stuff. So they're bringing in PR releases and that kind of thing. And they highlighted a tiny blurb from the Daily Star the other day that was like reporting on research from 2019, but the big takeaway was pregnancy demands more energy than ultra marathons. And this
Ugh.
idea being that like, yeah, like your energy demands go up, 2+ fold for a
Mhm.
long extended period of time versus like, one day, 1 week, a couple weeks if you're, riding the Tour de France, for example, like very
Mhm.
different scope of energy demands at
Right.
play. We spent a lot of time on the podcast talking about relative energy deficiency in sport, talking about low energy availability, amenorrhea, these things that shouldn't be taboo at all, but still feel like we're like kind of pushing them into the
Mhm.
mainstream over and over again. And we, I think, have always talked a lot about, well, these things could impact your fertility, your ability to conceive, your ability to, like, while you're trying to get pregnant. But it seems like, you know, even more so, there might be a connection to LEA, REDS, amenorrhea, might even have an impact on pregnancy outcomes And I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you can, because that's not where my brain goes. My brain goes naturally like, well, if you're, don't have a normal cycle, maybe that inhibits your ability to get pregnant. Maybe that's an indicator of general hormonal health. But when it comes to pregnancy outcomes, I would assume that like, oh, like, well, if you got pregnant, like that's the hard part. Like, how does that actually impact fertility outcomes and pregnancy outcomes?
Hmm. So that is one of the great unanswered questions that we have right now. So we published a study looking at history of REDS, history of LEA, and its potential impact on pregnancy outcomes. The big miss that we have with that one, which we're now following up, there's a new survey that's going to be, well, it's basically ready to release now, is looking specifically at fertility outcomes. So those individuals who are trying to get pregnant, we didn't capture whether or not there was an increased risk of miscarriage or early pregnancy complications. We only included in that particular study so far looking at women who actually had a pregnancy and delivered. And we did see that there was an increased risk of having preterm delivery, which is really interesting. And it's a bit complex to be able to try and disentangle when we're talking about a survey study. But there's lots of data out there that histories of eating disorders, a low body mass index, which are, of course, going to be associated with REDS, that there might also be some hormonal changes that are happening, which are potentially associated with this increased risk of having a preterm delivery. So very early stage at the moment when we're talking about looking at history of LEA and REDS on potential fertility and health outcomes during pregnancy. But again, my key take home with this is that we need to, ask the questions and we need to be aware because, if we don't ask these questions and all of a sudden your patient or yourself is going into preterm labor, there are things that can be done to help support the athlete through that time.
Keely, do you have something that you wanted to follow up on there?
I mean, a lot of things, but yeah, I think that this is obviously a very interesting area to be studied, to try to
Hmm.
see did these people have, infertility issues? Did they take a while to get pregnant? I know there was one paper that was published, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, that had an N of like less than 30 that showed maybe like a 3x more rate of infertility issues compared
Hmm.
to the general public. But again, it was
Yeah.
like such a small end that like that really doesn't conclude much of anything.
Yes.
But yeah, my current hypothesis, kind of to my previous point, is just like we're giving all these people access to these amazing resources, like through their athletic contracts, but can they actually utilize them? And I think some of the
Hmm.
research you're doing, some of the research I have planned with some of my colleagues at OHSU, hopefully we'll be able to at least start answering some of those questions of like, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe you can, or actually maybe there is some nuance to this, and we need to actually figure out how you should best train and treat your body so that you can utilize some of these amazing services to have a family later than normal.
Absolutely. Totally agree. I can't wait to see your work. I
We
want
can
to
talk
hear more
about it
about it.
off. We can talk about it
We're going to flip this one. I
offline.
want to hear about your work.
Yeah, I was gonna say you guys have a future in putting out some really, really important research. And I think to be respectful of your time today, we're gonna kind of round things out, but you're gonna put out more papers and then we're gonna have to have you back on to talk about more research that's coming down the pipeline. And then also if you are ever looking for research volunteers for surveys, we are always happy to share that information with our audience as well.
Oh,
So
I'd love that.
don't be a stranger. But we ask this question of almost everyone that comes on the podcast, and maybe besides like recognizing that 25 is young, we like to reflect on, what you know now that you wish you knew in the past. You've been doing this research for over 2 decades. And so I'm wondering, what is something that you know now that you wish you knew when you first got started?
Oh my goodness. So it's funny because when I was first starting out, I'm an exercise physiologist by training, and I really wish that I had gone to so many seminars that were outside of my area. The way that I do my research has completely changed by working with colleagues who do qualitative research and epidemiological research and like work outside of the field, like the very small field of pregnancy as well. I wish I'd talked to a lot more people and I wish I had gone to a lot more seminars because I think when we do research, we often think in a very narrow way. But to appropriately answer some of these questions, we really do have to take a broad scope. And I think that's what's really changed my research in the last 5 years is taking a bit more of a step back and a holistic view of this particular period of time.
I had to mute myself. My dog was about to go crazy. She still might go crazy.
Yeah, I love that. I think that one of the biggest strengths you can have as a researcher is to be able to have that holistic view, regardless of how narrow-minded your thesis work was or anything like
Mm,
that. Because it's like great to be an expert in a field, but it's also great to be that expert that can bring together different experts and make a
totally.
very general, holistic, conclusion about a body of work, right? And so it's really cool what you're doing. We love the Instagram and all of the posts that you're putting out and all the information you're sharing with athletes around the world. And so, kind of just to give our audience a little bit of insight into where to find you, why don't you go ahead and let us know, like, about your Instagram or any other means that you would like to be followed through?
Yeah, thanks. So my Instagram is Dr. Margie Davenport. Our website is exerciseandpregnancy.ca. So I'm not a natural Instagrammer, but I got really frustrated with the amount of misinformation and old information that was getting out there. So that's why Instagram is so much fun.
Yeah, it's where we've got a lot of friends that are following you, and we're
Oh,
following you as
great.
well. So we're very excited. We're living in the golden age maybe of individuals in our sport starting families and staying in sports, staying in contracts, and coming back to compete
Amazing.
postpartum. So they'll be excited to listen to this episode, and yeah, excited to have you back on for some follow-ups down the road.
Yeah. Well, I'm leading the new IOC guidelines, so we should chat again in 2026 after it's out if you want.
Yes, a
Perfect.
I'd love
thousand
to.
percent.
Yep,
We're
we'll
booking
we'll
it
book you
now.
now.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast,
Well,
Margie.
thanks for having me. It was fun.
Margie Davenport is my new favorite human. And we always say to guests, we're like, we could talk for hours with you. We're going to have you back. And I do think Margie is in that category of humans, given the research she's doing and the research she's going to be doing. I know, Keely, this is actually the current block you're in for
Uh-huh.
medical school right now.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I'm starting some research in the pregnancy and athlete space as well. So this talk was just so pertinent for me. And when she said that pregnancy is life's cardiovascular stress test, that resonated so much because the following day I had a lecture on the physiology of pregnancy. And we learn all of these things of like why it's actually this cardiovascular test where it impacts all of the body systems, right? The heart, the kidneys, the lungs, all of these things. And it's just so incredible what the body does during this time. Like it just blows my mind every time I think about it. And so I loved this interview. I think it was so fun. Margie is a wealth of knowledge. And yeah, I hope we get to have her on again.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. Harry,
Yeah.
any big takeaways from you from that interview?
Yeah, it was just talking to her. There's just like a lot of wheels that were turning. Just like questions of just, like kind of digesting all the information, the different studies. And then, I know we've talked about it a lot here, but it's just like, you know, I think we all experience like, I feel like I'm more productive and just like a more productive human, like outside of running, but like running brings so many things to my life, like being an athlete. And it's almost like, can that almost be a protective mechanism for being pregnant? Like, I don't know. It's just like I always think about these things of like they always, it's this mentality of, oh, we need to discourage, you need to stop this. But really, like what we see is people just doing it themselves. Like athletes who are already athletes, they keep on running. But it's like we could even market being an athlete as like it makes pregnancy easier. I don't know if that's even possible,
You
but
go in fit. There's definitely something about going
yeah.
into pregnancy fit and going in strong and all that jazz, right? Like I don't know, athletics and fertility is probably a different conversation,
Mhm.
but athletics and positive pregnancy outcomes
That's more what I was
and or
thinking
and
too.
or, like better delivery experience, better
Mhm.
potentially, like every pregnancy is different, but maybe a quote unquote, I don't want to say easier pregnancy. It's like how intervals never get easier. You
No.
just get fitter type of
Yeah.
thing, right? But I
Like
do
I
think
said,
that
yeah,
going in
protective
fit
mechanism, Yeah.
probably is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's a bell curve too. It's like If
Of
you're
course.
training too much and you're not eating enough, probably negative towards pregnancy. If
Yeah.
you're like resilient because of all this training, you're treating yourself well and you're fueling enough and you're sleeping enough,
Yeah.
probably going into pregnancy, that's going to have a lot of advantages for you. And you're probably going to be able to maintain that through pregnancy. It's
A
pretty cool.
common theme is like striking a
Yeah,
balance, striking a balance.
this whole like taking care of yourself is important no matter what kind of scenario. No, we're fine with that. Okay, we
Cue Corinne's
digress.
snack reminder. Just
Yeah,
kidding.
Q you must eat. Okay, actually, I'm gonna read a Society Slam as our rabbit plug because I think this is perfect, okay?
Ooh,
Yes, and there's
Okay.
one extra small of this shirt left.
Okay, so
So go get it.
one of you wrote in, and it's really, really cool. And it says, I wore the Trail Society sun hoodie in Lichen for my first ultra last weekend. Despite there being almost no sun during the race, we got snow instead. It was amazing, and I loved repping my favorite podcast. Thank you for being my companions on so many training runs over the last few months. Heck yeah. Also, if you're listening to us while you're on a run right now, you should probably eat a snack. But if you too, there again, Keely just said there's one extra small left. We believe in the lichen. Maybe it's still there when you're listening to this. If that is you, go over to runningrabbit.com and use the code FALLTRAIL10 for 10% off. Okay, there's two slams left. Beggars can't be choosers. Who's taking what?
I'll
I
go.
don't. Okay.
Ladies, first, y'all are just crushing it always. And the episode with Jill Colangelo was maybe the best yet. Maybe the best conversation on a running podcast that I've heard. Well, thank you. That is so lovely. The end discussion around discipline and the culture element around the deep underlying norms that are really in play in our sport. No one is discussing this, in my opinion. How can we keep the convo going around how we can be athletes and also answer the question of, am I good enough? Just so powerful to speak that out loud. Thank you so much. Also, my question, and maybe it becomes a request. What do you use to find races? Like, is there one source you like to find races, race calendars? I find that it's lacking. Would be awesome to have a comprehensive race calendar site that crowdsourced with key things to know, like they have great aid stations, etc. Thank you, ladies.
That's an excellent
Good question.
question. And it's like
Yeah,
region specific and country specific.
totally.
Because like I think many of us default to like ultra sign up, right? But ultra sign up doesn't have
A lot of races.
a lot of races. Like
Mhm.
it's and I think they at one point in time probably had the most races and they still have a lot of races, but there's also entire race orgs that are using like aren't using that system anymore. And
Mm.
so that is a little bit of a hiccup I have found.
Right, same here. No, and then between that and European races, it's like the UTMB races. I toggle between a bunch of them, but right, a lot of them don't even have the information that she was saying, which is actually quite quality. Like how is the vibe?
Yeah, what
Or
is the
Right.
experience?
yeah,
Mhm.
I
yeah.
think
Yeah, or like, does the aid station have tampons? I know that like, doesn't
Mm.
Trail Sisters have a list of their partnered races?
Yeah, and they usually have a little logo on the race if it's like Trail Sisters approved.
Right. But there's no like huge database that then shows you all these races with these little logos next to them all in one place with like
yeah.
vibes and all this. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so I always suggest to runners because we're all coaches here as well, so we're helping runners find races not infrequently. And so it's like,
Right.
okay, like what's the goal? Is the goal to qualify for some other thing? Therefore, you're going to be into like you're looking at Western States qualifiers or you're looking at UTMB qualifiers or whatever it is. Like that's one bucket, and that can like kind of help you start to filter and look. Or it's like you want to race regionally. Okay, so what are the vetted established race organizations near you. Here in the PNW, that might be Rain Shadow Racing, right? You can go directly to their website, or it might be Daybreak Racing. You can go directly to their website and kind of get a sense of maybe what that vibe is for each of those race orgs. But you're right, it's very difficult that there isn't one big central hub of the vibes based race selection.
Are
Mhm.
we gonna start a new Reddit thread?
So this could be a Reddit thread. That's what we have time for sure.
We can ask for outward
Yeah.
input.
Hillary, why don't you take this last one, number one on
Okay,
the
okay,
list?
okay. Hello, loved the most recent episode on the psychology of eating in our population. It had me wondering if maybe I had a psychological aversion to eating enough because I admittedly haven't been the best at it. But when Corinne came in with that tip about how you feel when you can't do your rituals around food and training, I realized that I think my problem might be my actual appetite. I used the analogy in the podcast I seem to have less an aversion to the third toast because of subconscious restriction and more of an aversion to the third piece of toast because I already had taken two. I'm sick of toast and I don't know what else happens to head. Is there any research on how to get over low appetite despite definitely being hungry and or managing flavor fatigue? Or for an easier question, any favorite snack suggestions to help us shake up our calories? And I love to hear your go-tos. I like this because honestly, I do think it's a problem. It's like sometimes with, endurance athletes, you kind of have to like eat like it's your job, and sometimes it's not fun anymore. And so I think she said something here. It's like, yeah, to shake it up. Like I think variety is the key. So you just don't kind of get into these routines. I know that can be helpful, but yeah, like for me it's like having different almost like fun nights of like, okay, this is the night that I'm gonna like try a new recipe, and then I'll have like a little bit of like leftover stuff that I can kind of like eat in the following days. But something like that to build in a bit of variety to your routine. And that's also like making a conscious decision to try different things when I run, a combination of nutrition from like a sports nutrition label, but also like real food. I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, I think it's funny how they say how to get over low appetite despite definitely being hungry because you're like, well, then your appetite's there and it's just more of maybe a lack of, or it's an aversion to the third piece of toast. And I
Yeah,
totally
or
feel
even
that.
like your body releases, we know it
Totally.
releases
When you
thing
exercise a lot.
that
Yeah.
makes eating harder. So it's like you're hungry, but
Uh-huh.
you're also kind of like, "Blah,
Yeah.
I'm nauseous or whatever."
Yeah, I feel like that's why I'm a fan of like the second and third breakfast because you can have like pre-run breakfast, do your run, have your post-run breakfast. Doesn't have to be this gigantic thing, but have your two pieces of toast and then maybe like make something totally new for like a couple hours later, and then you're still getting like enough calories, but you're not forcing yourself to eat like all of it in one sitting.
Yeah. It's like
Or like this
the best
concept.
food is the food you'll eat. It's kind of it's like the best
Mm,
exercise is the exercise you'll do. The best food is the
yeah,
food you'll eat. Like
yeah.
calories or
On a
calories kind of.
totally non like sponsored like pitch. Shalane Flanagan's superhero muffins just came out with like a pre-mixed bag that you just have to add eggs to and water. And I'm like, okay, that is like easy peasy
Buy,
calories.
buy,
Yeah.
click the buy
So
button right
I'm gonna
now.
try to find
Yeah.
those as soon as I can.
Like stuff like that. Like I was gonna say, like, okay, pick a food that you like and then make it a little bit different. Like if I like oatmeal, then I'll have like sweet oatmeal, but then I can still change the things that like sometimes I'll add a banana or like blueberries, or like a different fruit. And then the other thing, I'll have like savory oatmeal where I add like an egg and like pesto. It's like, stuff like that. And like with the superhero muffins, I freaking love those. And the thing that I
Mhm.
do there is I mix up like I'm like an experimenter in like I love baking and like experimenting with what I bake. So have that same recipe, but I'm like, I'm gonna add like a little bit of this and a little bit of that and like change it up. Like instead of like zucchini, I'll add like carrot one time and it'll like totally mix it up and make it taste different.
Yeah.
But it's the same
Yeah.
thing.
Variety is the spice of life. And sometimes, and I don't like calling them treats because you don't need to run to enjoy food.
Mm-mm.
But in my mind, it's kind of like, oh, like I'm going home from my run now. I'm gonna like I better like run this errand and I need a little bit more fuel on board or I need another snack. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna get a boba tea. And it's like it's a treat because it's a splurge or I'm spending money on something that I don't necessarily need to spend money on. It's not a treat because I had to earn it from a
Mhm.
running perspective. But it's just like finding on days where like eating is harder or I know I need more fuel in. It's like those little things I
Mhm.
think go a long way. Smoothies can be a really good like way to
Mhm.
kind of bypass that like aversion. And by that I mean like when you're feeling kind of nauseated but you know you need to get calories in or eating just doesn't feel pleasant. There's like just like little things to try to like nudge things forward and make small changes as you go along. But it's totally a conundrum and it's worse for me when I'm really like hot and warm in the summer versus in the winter. I
Totally.
don't struggle nearly as
Fresh
much.
fruit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We digress. Eat a snack. And until next time, we'll catch you out on the trails.